She was 92 years old when the men showed up with shovels. Nobody asked for permission. The county needed that stretch of land. A new road was coming through, right where the old Redemption Creek Cemetery stood. There was just one problem. Somebody had to move the bodies first. Eleanor Whitfield watched it all from the window, her hands shaking on her cane. She knew exactly which grave those men would open first that morning. 40 years, and nobody had touched that particular patch of ground. 40 years, and she'd kept the secret buried there, all alone. Her grandson Daniel tried to get her to rest inside, away from the window. She refused, her voice steady. She needed to see this with her own eyes. "Grandma, it's just dirt and old wood," Daniel said, not understanding her fear. Eleanor didn't answer. She just gripped the silver locket she always carried in her coat pocket. When the shovel struck the coffin lid, Eleanor closed her eyes tight. Because that coffin didn't just hold a man she'd loved her whole life. It held a letter that could tear apart everything this town believed was true. It held a name nobody in Redemption Creek dared speak out loud anymore. And she had to decide, before it was too late, if the secret would die with her. Redemption Creek was never much to look at, not in 1886, not now. One main street, one white church, one saloon with a piano that never stayed in tune. Summers coated everything in dust, even the laundry hanging on the lines out back. Winters cut through the thin wood walls like a blade through canvas. Folks here raised cattle, planted corn, and held on to secrets like they held on to gold. Nobody talked loud about the past in this town. Loud talk brought too many questions. And in Redemption Creek, questions always came with a price tag attached. The sheriff back then was a man named Thomas Hale, fair but worn thin by the job. He'd already watched good men die over feuds that started over next to nothing. So he watched this town the way a man watches a powder keg by a lit stove. One wrong spark, and the whole place could go up, families and all. The town ran on cattle, on a train that rolled through twice a week, and on plain faith. Come Sunday, nearly everyone packed into that little church, even the ones who barely believed. That's where the gossip moved faster than any newspaper could print it. There was Walt, the blacksmith, a big, quiet man who saw everything and judged no one. And there was Pastor Ames, who preached forgiveness on Sundays and traded rumors every Monday. It was into that tense little world that Jonas Cole rode in, alone, one August evening. Nobody knew yet that this tired stranger was about to change nearly everyone's fate. The town carried other old stories too, ones nobody said out loud at the dinner table. Years back, a fire at the sawmill killed 2 men, and nobody ever learned the real cause. That kind of silence was ordinary in Redemption Creek, almost a tradition passed down. Families learned early that certain questions cut deeper than any answer could heal. It was inside that old silence that Eleanor and Jonas's story found room to grow. Eleanor was 19 that summer, working the counter at the only general store in town. She measured salt, bagged flour, and dreamed of a world bigger than Redemption Creek. Both her parents were gone. A house fire took them when she was still a child. She lived with her Uncle Roy, a man who drank more than he worked and rarely spoke. Roy's name was on the store, but Eleanor was the one who actually ran it, alone. The other girls in town already talked about weddings, dresses, and babies on the way. Eleanor talked about none of that. She'd rather watch people than be watched herself. She noticed lies before anyone else in town ever caught on. She noticed loneliness too, hiding behind the forced smiles of the older women nearby. On her free nights, she read whatever books Pastor Ames could lend her. She dreamed of riding a train to some big city she'd never even seen. She kept those dreams to herself, the way you keep something too fragile to share. Some nights, she'd sit on the store's porch just to feel the cool air on her face. It was on one of those quiet, ordinary nights that she heard hooves coming down the road. Maybe that's why, when an armed stranger walked into her store, she felt no fear at all. She only noticed how his hands shook slightly as he reached for the hot coffee. A gunslinger with shaking hands was something nobody else in town would have noticed or cared to. Eleanor noticed. And that one small detail changed everything that came after in her life. By then, she'd already learned to bury her own feelings under a full day's work. She rose before sunrise, opened the store, and didn't stop until the last candle burned out. She never complained, because complaining changed nothing and just tired out whoever listened. But underneath, she carried a real hunger to be truly seen by someone just once. Some nights she wondered if she'd grow old alone behind that same counter, doing the same chores. That question haunted her most on the cold nights when the house felt too quiet to bear. Jonas Cole rode in alone, one gun on his hip, another tucked in his boot. People on the street stepped back fast the moment they saw him pass through the dust. Word was he'd killed 3 men in Abilene for money, plain and simple. Word was he was an outlaw, a bounty man who played by no rules but his own. Nobody knew the truth. Jonas Cole had been running for 2 years, not hunting anybody. He'd watched his own younger brother hang for a crime he never committed. That brother's name was Daniel Cole, just 17 years old when the rope took him. Since that day, Jonas trusted no judge, no sheriff, no promise wearing the name of justice. He trusted his aim and his own 2 hands and getting through one more hard day. He'd been drifting for close to 2 years, sleeping more on open ground than in beds. He'd changed towns the moment somebody recognized his name off some dusty wanted poster. He carried a small silver locket in his saddlebag, his brother's photograph tucked inside. It was the only thing left of a family he hadn't managed to save in time. Some nights he'd take out that locket and talk to the photo, low and quiet. He'd promise his dead brother that one day he'd find the man truly responsible for that noose. There was something about Redemption Creek that made him want to stay, just for a week. Maybe it was the years of exhaustion finally catching up with him. Maybe it was the girl behind the counter, the one who didn't look away like everyone else. Jonas couldn't say for sure. He only knew that, for the first time in years, he wanted to stop running. Before Redemption Creek, he'd drifted through 7 different towns in just over a year. In each one, he'd pick up odd work and sleep a few nights. Then he'd move on before roots could take hold. He'd learned, the hard way, that trusting people brought more pain than comfort ever did. So the moment he felt the urge to stay, he also felt afraid. It was a fear worse than any gunfight, afraid that if he stayed, he'd have something real to lose for the first time in years. He came back to the store the next day without really needing to buy a thing. Eleanor caught the weak excuse, but said nothing. She just slid the coffee across the counter. "You don't strike me as a man who likes conversation," she said, plain and unafraid. "And you don't strike me as a girl who's scared of a gunslinger," he answered, surprised. It was the first real smile Jonas had cracked in months. Eleanor tucked that smile away in her memory, like a rare coin worth keeping. In the days that followed, he showed up at the same hour, always with some flimsy excuse. One day it was coffee, the next, salt, then a nail he clearly didn't need. She started setting aside the best coffee beans, just for whenever he walked in. Neither one spoke openly about how they felt. Their actions did the talking instead. One afternoon, her Uncle Roy muttered, half-drunk, that gunslinger's nothing but trouble for this town. Eleanor said nothing back, but felt her stomach tighten at the thought of losing this so soon. One evening, Jonas waited outside the store, leaning on a post, saying nothing at first. They walked together to the wooden bridge on the edge of town, mostly in silence. The river below ran calm, catching the last orange light of the day. There, he finally pulled the small silver locket from his pocket, offering no explanation. Inside, it was a photograph of a child Eleanor didn't recognize right away. "That was my brother," was all he said before tucking the locket back into his pocket. Eleanor didn't ask anything else that night. Asking too soon, she felt, might break something fragile. They walked back slowly, hands almost touching, neither one brave enough to close that gap. At her door, Jonas stopped, and for a moment looked like he'd say something more important. He changed his mind, just tipped his hat goodbye, and walked off alone into the dark street. Eleanor stood there for several minutes, feeling her heart beat in a way it never had before. She barely slept that night, replaying every word from the bridge in her head. For the first time in a long while, she felt her life might be bigger than she'd imagined. Little by little, Jonas started helping Walt the blacksmith at the forge, barely charging him a thing. He fixed the church roof after a bad storm, tore off half the shingles. Pastor Ames thanked him from the pulpit the next Sunday in front of the whole congregation. The kids stopped running from him in the street. They started asking to see his gun from a distance. Sheriff Hale still kept his guard up around the stranger, but he admitted the man worked harder than he complained. One Sunday, Jonas showed up at the church door, though he never once stepped inside during service. He'd stand just outside listening to the hymns, hat pressed tight between his hands. Eleanor started sitting near the window just to watch him listening out there alone. One hot afternoon, a spooked horse nearly ran down a child in the middle of the street. Jonas ran and grabbed the animal's reins, stopping the tragedy with only seconds to spare. The child's mother wept, thanking him right there in front of the whole street. The town talked about it for weeks. The fear people felt for him slowly turned to real respect. Even Uncle Roy stopped bad-mouthing Jonas, at least in front of his niece. Eleanor and Jonas started walking together at dusk, always taking the quieter road out of town. She told him about the parents she'd lost young and the uncle who drank too much every day. He told her about his hanged brother and the years spent running from town to town. Neither one judged the other for it. It was something entirely new for them both after so much loneliness. On one of those walks, Jonas taught Eleanor to shoot an old pistol, just in case. She hit the target on her third try and laughed the way she hadn't laughed in years. One night, sitting on the bridge, he said maybe he could stay here for good. Eleanor smiled, but felt a sudden chill run down her spine at that simple sentence. Because she knew, better than anyone in town, one simple truth. The past always catches up with a man who runs, and Jonas Cole's past was just days away from riding into Redemption Creek behind him. Around that time, Sheriff Hale pulled Jonas aside for a quiet word outside the jailhouse. He asked, straight out, what his intentions were toward Eleanor Whitfield. Jonas said he meant to work honest and never run from anything again in his life. Hale studied the man for a long moment, weighing every word carefully. In this town, we judge a man by his actions, Hale finally said, not by some poster nailed up at the post office. It was the first time anyone in a position of authority had treated Jonas like a man, not like a crime. That landed harder than any compliment he'd ever received, and Jonas held on to those words for good. Uncle Roy, for his part, stayed wary, but let Jonas keep helping around the store. One morning, Jonas fixed the broken storeroom door on his own, without anyone asking. Roy watched from a distance, coffee in hand, and for once didn't have a sour word to say. It was a small thing, but to Eleanor it meant that maybe finally the pieces could fit together. She started picturing quietly a future where she wouldn't have to live under her uncle's roof anymore. A man named Silas Grant rode into town one quiet Sunday afternoon, unannounced. He claimed to be a sheriff from another county, chasing an old bounty on Jonas Cole. He showed Sheriff Hale a worn, crumpled poster with Jonas's name and a murder charge on it. The news spread through town faster than any train that had ever passed through. The same people Jonas had helped now whispered behind his back, looking away when he walked by. Walt the blacksmith was the only one who kept greeting Jonas plain without crossing the street. Sheriff Hale had to arrest him, even without fully believing the man was guilty. Jonas didn't fight it when Hale's men came for him at the forge at dusk. He handed over his gun without a struggle and was locked in the town's small wooden jail. Eleanor ran there the moment she heard, her heart pounding hard in her chest. Hale wouldn't let her in. "He'll get a trial. It's the law," he said, not meeting her eyes. That night, unable to sleep, Eleanor decided to search the room where Silas Grant was staying. She waited for the man to head down to the saloon, then slipped in through the back window. Hidden inside an old leather bag, she found a bundle of yellowed, faded letters. The letters proved the bounty was fake, forged by the real killer of Jonas's brother. Silas Grant wasn't any kind of sheriff at all. He was the very man Jonas had sworn to find. He hadn't come to Redemption Creek to arrest Jonas. He'd come to kill him before he could talk. Eleanor understood, throat tight, that Jonas was in real danger, locked up in that cell, and that she alone knew the truth, hidden inside that bundle of old, faded letters. On her way home, she passed Pastor Ames. He asked if she was all right, worried by her rush. She lied, said she'd only forgotten something at home, and kept walking without stopping. Her heart was still pounding when she finally locked the door behind her, out of breath. She sank to the kitchen floor, letters spread out in front of her, trying to think straight. She knew that from this moment on, there was no pretending she hadn't seen any of it. She thought about waking Uncle Roy for advice, but gave up, knowing how he'd react. Roy would likely tell her to stay far away from all of it, and forget Jonas Cole entirely. But Eleanor could no longer picture her own life without his quiet presence nearby. She hid the letters under her mattress. Then she lay staring at the ceiling until the first light of dawn. Eleanor faced two choices, and either one would cost her dearly. She could show Hale the letters and admit she'd broken into a guest's room to find them. That would ruin her reputation in a town that already talked too much about her and Jonas. Or she could stay quiet and let the law run its slow, blind course. If she stayed quiet, Jonas would hang before any truth ever came to light. She remembered his smile at the store, the silver locket, his trembling hand around the coffee cup. She remembered, too, that he had never once lied to her, not in all those months. She spent the night sitting on her bed, letters pressed to her chest, unable to decide. She thought of her drunk uncle and of the town's gossip. She thought of the name she'd lose if she spoke up. She thought, too, about what would be left of her if she stayed silent forever after this. She remembered Pastor Ames's words about choosing the truth even when the truth comes at a cost. So Eleanor did the only thing that made sense for someone who truly loved another person. She threw her coat over her nightdress and grabbed the letters hidden under her mattress. She walked alone to Hale's house and knocked on his door at midnight. She told him everything, hiding nothing about herself or what she'd done. "I'd rather lose my name than lose the chance to save the truth," she said, her voice steady. Hale stared at the letters for a long moment, in complete silence, under the lamp's weak light. Then he grabbed the gun hanging by the door. He walked to the jail where Silas stood guard over Jonas. Eleanor followed close behind, knowing full well this could end in the worst possible way. The streets sat empty at that hour, lit only by a lamp here and there still burning. She felt her legs shake with every step, but she never stopped, not even for a second. She thought of everything Jonas had built in those few weeks: the church roof, the runaway horse, the shared smiles. She thought no reputation was worth more than the life of a man who'd learned to trust again. That thought kept her moving, even with fear tightening around her chest with every step. Silas Grant never expected to be confronted before finishing what he'd come to do. He drew first, the moment he saw Hale walk in with a hard, set face. Hale was faster, and the shot caught Silas in the arm, dropping him to the floor. Jonas seized the moment of chaos and grabbed Silas's gun off the ground near the cell. "It was you," Jonas said, his voice low and steady, staring down at the wounded man. "You killed my brother and let another innocent man hang for your crime for years." Silas didn't deny a thing. He just smiled, like a man with nothing left to lose. Jonas raised the gun, his finger shaking on the trigger, eyes burning with tears. Years of swallowed rage rose up all at once, heavier than he could carry alone. Eleanor appeared in the jailhouse doorway at that exact moment, breathless, showing no fear. "If you pull that trigger now, you'll be exactly the man they always said you were." The words hit Jonas like a second bullet, cutting deeper than the first. He looked at Eleanor for a moment that seemed to stretch across an entire lifetime. Then he looked down at the silver locket still hanging from his belt, catching the lamp's dim glow. He thought of his brother and of trembling hands around a coffee cup. He thought of a quiet bridge over calm water. He lowered the gun slowly and handed Silas Grant over to real justice, not his own revenge. For the first time in years, Jonas Cole chose to be stronger than his own pain. Hale locked Silas Grant into the very same cell Jonas had stood in minutes before. And it was right there, in that dusty jailhouse doorway, that Eleanor knew. She loved him without a doubt. The two of them stood still for a moment, saying nothing. They just breathed in the relief of being alive. Hale, still gripping his wounded arm, thanked Eleanor for having the courage to come when she did. "If you hadn't shown up, this town would have lost 2 good men tonight," he said, grave. Eleanor only shook her head, unable to find words for everything she felt in that moment. Jonas stepped closer, slowly, and took her hand for the first time. He did it right there in front of the whole town. A few neighbors, drawn by the gunshot, had already gathered in the street, watching in silence. Nobody said a word. They just watched the feared gunslinger hold the store clerk's hand and not let go. It was right there in that simple moment that Redemption Creek started changing its mind about Jonas Cole. Silas Grant stood trial 3 months later and confessed to the crime in front of the whole courtroom. He hanged that same month, finally paying for the crime he'd always denied committing. Jonas Cole stayed in Redemption Creek and never again picked up a gun for revenge. He and Eleanor married in the small church he himself had helped repair months before. Half the town showed up, including people who used to cross the street just to avoid him. Walt the blacksmith forged them a small iron ring as a wedding gift with his own hands. They had a son named Thomas, in honor of the sheriff, who'd risked everything for justice that night. The boy grew up never fully knowing the weight of the last name he carried. Jonas worked as a blacksmith for the rest of his life, alongside Walt. He never ran from a town again. He died 33 years later of natural causes, surrounded by the family he'd managed to build. Before he passed, he asked Eleanor to bury his brother's locket with him and a letter that told the whole truth, in case someone one day needed to know it. Eleanor kept that secret for 40 years, never telling a soul in town. Not even her own son, who grew up believing only the gentle version of that old story. Until the day the county men opened that grave with their rusted shovels. When they found the letter inside the coffin, they finally understood why Jonas's name was never officially cleared. Eleanor, sitting in her wheelchair, simply smiled, knowing the truth would finally be told. "He earned this 40 years ago," she said quietly, to no one but herself. Daniel, her grandson, held her hand tight, not yet grasping the full weight of those simple words. The town of Redemption Creek put up a new marker at that cemetery a few weeks later. On it, just one simple line: "Here lies a man who chose the truth in the end." Eleanor passed away the following winter, knowing she'd finally kept her last promise to Jonas Cole. In her own coffin, by her own request, they placed just one thing: an old photograph of the wooden bridge, the same spot where, decades before, a tired gunslinger had finally decided to stop running. Years later, Daniel, her grandson, planted a small tree beside that new marker in the cemetery. He said it was to remind people that even the heaviest secrets can bloom into peace someday. Redemption Creek stayed small, but it started telling this story out loud finally, without shame. Not as a mystery to fear anymore, but as proof that the truth always comes back around, and proof that real love can carry 40 years of silence and never once burn out. Sheriff Hale, very old by then, read about the discovery in a local paper. He told his grandson with pride that it had been the most important night of his whole career. Walt the blacksmith had passed years before, but his forge still ran, kept alive by one of his sons. And the store where it all began became a small bookshop decades later. It was run by one of Eleanor's great-granddaughters. In the window, without customers ever knowing why, there always sat a small silver locket on display. Few people knew the full story behind that simple, weathered little object, but anyone who asked always got the same gentle answer. It passed down from the great-granddaughter, like family history. "It's a long story," she'd say, smiling, "but it ends well. It always ends well. If this story moved you, hit like. And let me know in the comments, would you have kept the secret for Jonas or told the truth sooner? Subscribe so you don't miss the next story. The next Old West secret might be even more shocking than this one.